Tonight, an Albanese government minister refuses to apologise for fake claims that the Liberals covered up the rape of Brittany Higgins. Plus the Albanese government's new defence plans. One of America's top generals now says the government must wake up. Also tonight, police in Victoria complain they're being worn down by all these protests, especially against Israel. What they don't realise is that actually is the plan. And spot the difference, how the media is going soft on the Muslim boy who allegedly stabbed the Christian bishop, but is painting the bishop as a villain. Plenty more, including Barnaby Joyce. But first, the extraordinary story of a man calling himself the Aussie Cossack, a fugitive from our police who's been hiding for nearly 2 years in the Russian consulate in Sydney, where he's been rewarded by Russian President Vladimir Putin and hired to pump out vile propaganda from that consulate that's meant to divide us, including fake news and race-baiting views on these stabbings. And our government does nothing about this shocking interference backed by Russia in our domestic politics. Now, there's a reason I want to talk about this vile man right now. It's because there's a warning that our governments are reacting to the stabbings in a lazy way, even a dangerous way, by taking away your free speech. Now, I totally get the need to come together after the mass murder in the Bondi Junction shopping centre. Let's not talk about people like Aussie Cossack, particularly after the stabbing of the Christian bishop in his Western Sydney church, and the Bondi Junction Mall, thankfully, was open today after the tragedy there too. It was open for politicians to pay their respects for the 6 people killed. And shoppers paid their respects too, and there were the flowers, everything quiet, tributes to the heroes who tried to save the shoppers from a mentally ill man with a knife. Heroes like the Bollard man.
And we are just like, okay, I need to show him like that I won't let him pass, I won't let him go. I need to stop him right now, so I need to show him like I can go as far as I can do actually. So.
No, that's great. Also good. At the same time, politicians, police and religious leaders trying to lower the temperature, ease the ethnic and religious tensions that have erupted after the stabbing of that Assyrian Christian bishop, Mamari Emmanuel. And warning, this is distressing, allegedly stabbed by a 16-year-old Muslim who was upset, or so he allegedly says on a video, by the bishop criticising his prophet. So, you know, I get the praise today for the Muslim leaders who say they're appalled by that attack. And there's also lots of lovely talk about how wonderful our multicultural country is, how peaceful we are.
It's wonderful to see that we are a community that can come together. I spoke to young police officers that said for the first time in their careers they were walking down the street in Bondi or Waverley and complete strangers were coming up to them, thanking them for their service to the state and wishing them the best.
But there, wait a bit. It's lovely to talk about all these good things that we see coming out of this, but it's not quite true, some of that, is it? And the question is whether we just keep talking about the lovely stuff, hoping it does unite us, or whether we also admit to what's really going on. You see, this is clearly not the united, peaceful, successfully multicultural country we like to think. And one reason is multiculturalism is not, in my opinion, a strength, but a challenge. And right now, the New South Wales federal governments and their police and their censors are trying desperately to, in fact, put a lid on the tensions that could explode and hurt a lot of people. I've already seen on Monday how supporters of Bishop Mamari Emmanuel, some from Middle Eastern backgrounds, rioted after he was attacked and smashed up police cars and injured 51 of our police in really a tribal attack. Like our police were foreign, a foreign force to them. Police even had to lock down Liverpool Hospital, where the bishop and, it's believed, the alleged attacker were taken. Locked it down. Now, the fear is not just that some of the Assyrian community are going to go for payback, but that some of the Muslim community will also respond. Or perhaps, you know, feel marginalised even more, marginalise themselves even more. There's already media articles which read to me like suggestions of Muslims, again, supposedly being picked on by the authorities. Why was the stabbing of the bishop declared a terrorist attack, but not the stabbing of the shoppers at Bondi Junction? Now, all that may be explains why the police didn't just start arresting the thugs who allegedly attacked them outside the church on Monday, and they should arrest them. But they made sure they were filmed noisily doing exactly that and not just picking on Muslims.
Over the door! Over the door now! Open the door now! Police search! Police search warrant! Police search warrant! Police search warrant!
Now, all these are scenes from a multicultural Australia I find disturbing, because you've got to ask yourself, is this how our multiculturalism must now be policed? But unfortunately, there is another way it's being policed. Censorship. Now, this government has been pushing hard its new misinformation laws that censor you on the internet, but not the government. Now, that's been held up. There's been huge blowback. People don't like it. But with these stabbings, the government is pushing it again. It's like it's exploiting it. In fact, the Safety Commission has already demanded Facebook and Twitter take down footage, not just from the Bondi Junction murders, but of the bishop being stabbed, take it down or face massive fines. And the New South Wales Premier today was appalled that some of that footage was still up.
There's also still, my understanding, the confronting images of the stabbing at Wakeley on Monday night, still available on social media. It's pretty hard to defend it, considering we're 48 hours after the offence and it's still up, still available. Now think about what that does to community cohesion. These are unedited images of an alleged crime that are guaranteed to sow division in the community and make passions boil over.
Now, you may think, fair enough, that footage should not be shown. I'll talk to in a second to someone who does think it should be. But you could hear the Premier's fear there. Far from being that happy, peaceful, multicultural community coming together, we're supposedly such a powder keg that our politicians do not dare let us see what really happened to the bishop. Passions would boil over, they say. This is fear of the society our politicians have helped to create. And this is how we must now police our multiculturalism. Or is it? Is the answer to police us all, censor us all, or in fact to go after the real hate preachers, the real dividers, like the Sydney hate preachers spreading hatred of Jews? Nothing has been done to these guys we've shown you here so often, nothing. Or go after people like the Aussie Cossack. So, we're back to this guy. His real name is Simeon Boykov. He was actually born here, but identifies as Russian, as is the way, a Cossack even, and acts like a total ratbag. He's been in trouble with the police, he's attacked COVID lockdown laws, he's welched on debts and had an apprehended violence order taken out on behalf of his wife.
An apprehended violence order New South Wales Police took out against Boykov on behalf of his wife, the second in 4 years. He must not assault, threaten, stalk, harass or intimidate her.
Now, Boykov is a Russian ultra-nationalist. 2 years ago, he allegedly pushed down and injured a man at a rally to support Ukraine. And he fled to the Russian consulate in Sydney, where he's lived ever since, hiding from our police. Now, this is shocking enough. Boykov didn't have Russian citizenship. He was allegedly being investigated for breaking Australian law, hurting someone. So why were the Russians protecting him? Now, the answer, it seems, is that it's useful to Vladimir Putin, the war criminal who's Russia's president. Putin gave Boykov Russian citizenship for services to the nation. And he got a job too with the Russian government's Sputnik. That's a propaganda arm so nasty it's been banned in several countries. But Boykov is now producing social media posts and videos from the consulate.
You are watching the Aussie Cossack show live across multiple platforms.
Now, as the Aussie Cossack, Boykov has not just promoted Putin and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and live-streamed pro-Vladimir Putin rallies, all from the consulate. He's also pumped out disinformation and incitement, certain to inflame radicals and the disaffected right here. He has promoted some of Australia's most viciously anti-Israel activists. He's falsely claimed the Bondi Junction killer was a Jew called Benjamin Cohen, a false and inflammatory claim that Channel 7 repeated. They repeated his name. And is now stirring up Muslim feelings of persecution after the stabbings, asking why wasn't the Bondi Junction killer also called a terrorist?
Why is the word terrorist only applied to certain people? Why isn't this guy a terrorist if he committed a terrorist act? Is it because he's not Muslim?
Stirring that pot. Anti-Jewish sentiment. Muslim grievance. It's stunning that our government hasn't dragged in the Russian ambassador to demand this Simeon Boykov be stopped from interfering in our domestic politics and inflaming tensions here with the clear backing and logistical support of the Russian government. It is sinister that our government would rather shut down your free speech than shut down a real source of the poison. And not just the hate preachers in Sydney, but this wanted man who's hiding and operating for Vladimir Putin from the Russian consulate in Sydney. But you know how it is, don't you? It's always easier for governments to control the law-abiding than to police the wicked. As I said, the government's commissioner for censoring the internet, the Safety Commissioner, has ordered Twitter and Facebook to remove footage of the two stabbing attacks. And that has already affected the country's biggest social media site for a Jewish organisation, which has posted footage of the stabbing of the bishop. Joining me is David Adler, President of the Australian Jewish Association. David, thank you very much for your time. First of all, what's happened to your postings?
Well, on Facebook, it has been taken down, and our Facebook page, the Facebook page of the Australian Jewish Association, has been sanctioned at this stage without warning, and it is the largest Jewish platform in Australia. So it's really important that we are able to communicate with the community and share relevant information, inform people, etc. And it's still up, but the video has been removed by Meta, and some restrictions have been imposed upon us, and a warning.
Now, David, you heard the New South Wales Premier earlier say, just a few minutes ago, the footage should be taken down. He had trouble imagining a good reason to show stabbings and things like that because it would sow divisions, he said, and make passions boil over. Does he have a point? What is your reason for showing what would footage that would distress some people?
Well, we treat our community as adults. We don't believe in treating people as the proverbial mushrooms. There has never been a successful society built on hiding truth. And there are a couple of really important big issues that deserve debate and deserve exposure. In the case of the event at Westfield, Bondi Junction, the alleged perpetrator is someone who has been supposedly having a significant schizophrenia, mental health problem out of control, and we closed our long-term mental health facilities in New South Wales years ago. So there is a debate to be had about the treatment and safety associated with the severe end of mental health issues. Regarding the event concerning the stabbing of the bishop in the church at Wakeley, the allegation is that that was an example of a Islamist, a young guy, driven by...
That's the allegation, we don't know for sure.
That's the allegation, Islamist motivation. And if that is proven to be the case, then there is a debate to be had about how we deal with that. So we think that rather than sweep it under the carpet... But do you
need to actually show the footage to do that? We're having the debate, do you need to show the footage?
I think our population needs a wake-up. The ASIO chief again reiterated that the largest single threat to Australia's security domestically was radicalised Sunni Islam. And so this has authoritative backing. And our society has been largely asleep, and our politicians have been unwilling to properly debate it and deal with it. And frankly, the only way to move politicians is with public pressure, and the only way to build that public pressure is if people are properly informed. Now, I'm not recommending that everybody should see the footage, but I think that we need to treat mature adults as mature adults and have the choice. The censorship, the sweeping under the carpet... It
seems to me, David... Sorry
works.
to interrupt, I'm just running out of time, but it seems to me what you're trying to do is ram it in people's face like this is the consequence. A little bit, look, this is a much more dramatic example, of course, but I remember it used to be how one photo of a girl in Vietnam burnt by napalm in the Vietnam War absolutely changed the debate. You could not look away from her running, screaming down the street from those injuries that had consequences, and if those consequences would not have been made without seeing the photo. Now, exactly. I think it's overstated the case to say that your footage of the bishop being attacked had to be also shown, but is that the point you're trying to make? Don't look away, this is the consequence.
We believe in truth, and you're right. The Vietnam example of that poor young girl changed the debate. It focused people on the reality of what napalm can do to civilians. And perhaps it was one of the factors that led to the end of the Vietnam War.
Well, I could see that. But I can see that argument. I'm not 100%... Look, I'm uneasy, David, because I also know... look, I'm uneasy, but I actually see your point, and I'm very suspicious of censorship. And I do think people too often look away without, thinking what the actual consequences of some of these social policies deliver. David Adler, thank you so much for your time. I leave it to you to what you think. Censor or not censor? I don't know. Why don't they go after the hate preachers in the first place? That's what I want to know. After the break, Labor's Future Made in Australia plan, we discussed it last night, has already backfired majorly, with billions of your tax dollars set to be wasted. Barnaby Joyce, up next. Well, that sure didn't take long. Look, the Albanese government released its new U-Butte scheme to spray your money at businesses it reckons are going to be winners. That was just last week. I said straight off the bat, this is going to cause some problems. We're talking here about billions of dollars, a scheme the government's calling Future Made in Australia, throwing grants and loans on green businesses like the Prime Minister did yesterday to a couple more.
This is what is going to power Queensland. This is where the investment will be.
Oh, really? 1 week on, and we've just got two more new examples of how dangerous and silly this new strategy of picking winners can be. The first is actually from January, though. It just came to my attention, a solar farm in Western Australia that the federal government gave $21 million to, plus millions more in cheap loans. It's being scrapped after just 7 years. A solar farm meant for a mine that's shutting shop. But then yesterday, more embarrassment. Here is the government saying it's going to spend your money on new winners, corporates, to have our future built here. But just yesterday, our biggest plastic maker collapsed. 700 jobs at risk, in part because of green policies and political mistakes that have made the price of gas too high to compete. So Qenos gone, which left the government's Assistant Minister for Manufacturing with, as they say in Dutch, a mouthful of teeth. Couldn't think of anything smart to say.
I'm very reluctant from Kuala Lumpur to make comments about the government's engagement with Qenos and where that's up to, because I'm just not on the spot. What it does is it underscores how important it is that we build new, modern industrial capability in Australia in the global supply chains.
Says a man who's just lost 700 jobs under his watch. Joining me, as on every Thursday, is Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, so why does a green business get a government handout, but our biggest maker of things like plastic pipes not?
Well, we've been hearing about Qenos going for some months. I've been reading about it in the paper, so I don't know why people think it's a surprise when your energy price is going through the roof. Because, and you said farms again, they're not farms, they're intermittent power companies that swindle your listeners, that swindle the pensioners, they swindle everything, they're swindle factories. Well, when the swindle factories in the solar configuration and the wind turbine configuration and transmission lines, when they all get together, power price goes through the roof, reliability goes through the floor, money overseas, and Qenos go bye-bye, and a lot of other companies will be going with them. Bye-bye, we're leaving Australia because you guys are on Peter Pan pills. You are you're completely off the dial. You have this sort of crazy idea that in a chamber in Macquarie Street or a chamber in Spring Street or a chamber in Canberra, that you can change this, the great vault of heaven, that you can pass legislation that will make it all cooler. And of course, when people hear that, they say, that's really interesting, and bye.
I should add that Qenos, it needed gas not just for energy, but to actually make the plastic. So there you go. So it was a double whammy. Barnaby, the judge who this week ruled that, yes, Brittany Higgins was raped by a former Liberal colleague, Bruce Lemon, he also said that the narrative that pushed by Labor, pushed by the media, that the Morrison government then covered up the crime and treated her badly could not be justified. He pointed out to a number of errors in Higgins' claim on that. But the Albanese government actually gave Higgins $2.4 million on exactly that false claim. And Finance Minister Katie Gallagher today didn't seem keen now to try and get that taxpayer money back. Here she is.
I'm not privy to it. I wasn't a decision maker in it. I had no role in it. But that agreement had been finalised between the Commonwealth and Ms Higgins in accordance with those rules.
Barnaby, she also refused to personally apologise for herself pushing the fake conspiracy cover-up theory. What's going on here?
Oh, wouldn't we like to know any correspondence between Katie Gallagher and Brittany Higgins? Wouldn't we all like to know about that? $2.4 million, folks. There's not a veteran who has received $2.4 million for the injuries they've got fighting in wars. For the injuries they've got fighting in wars. There's not a veteran in Australia who's defended our nation, who's got $2.4 million in a matter of hours. In a matter of hours, just like, here's some money. Like, what? There has to be some reason that surely there wasn't any sort of like, you know, maybe if you do the right thing by us, we might be able to help you out a little bit. If you just go quietly, $2.4 million going your way. I'm not saying that happened at all. I'm just saying it'd be nice for the NAC, with, you know, this Anti-Corruption Commission, to just give us some sense of confidence that it didn't happen. Just a little bit of confidence that nothing like that could have happened. But because I listen to Ms. Gallagher, I get a sense that we're not hearing the whole story. We're only hearing a tiny little bit of it.
You can count on it. In fact, you're hearing a completely fake story at times. Barnaby, you're the Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs. Anzac Day, right? So you had the Prime Minister saying in response to these stabbings that we all needed to come together, right? And I do think we need to find what unites us and celebrate what unites us, including the national symbols. Anzac Day is one of the biggest days of national significance on our calendar. It's Thursday next week. But the government is now allowing all federal public servants to take a different day off as their public holiday, instead of the day off to actually mark this significant day. What do you make of that?
Well, Anzac Day, I'm down here in Sydney, the great city of Sydney, to do Veterans Affairs work. And Anzac Day, I would say, for most Australians, is the greatest day of commemoration, absolutely focuses our nation. We go to the dawn service, not to be seen because it's dark. We go there to reflect and to honour those great people who've defended our nation, and families, to say that the honour that's come to their family from the people who have served. And what we've seen with the Labor Party is, well, if you don't want to, you can work Anzac Day, even if you don't have to work. I understand people in the hotels that look after people on Anzac Day, and the RSL clubs, and those who actually, doctors and nurses, got that. But other people who don't have to work can actually work Anzac Day and take another day and go surfing, or get a knock around the bush, or lounge around the house, rather than doing the reason we have Anzac Day, so you can note those who died for our nation, got injured for our nation, whose families split up while they were away fighting for our nation, who were psychologically traumatised for our nation, whose careers were left behind, never to be picked up again because they went away and served our nation. And maybe rather than making it a long weekend so you can go surfing, how about you get out of bed early, go to the dawn service, and spend the day reflecting on the whole reason you have that house you live in, the whole reason you have this nation you live in, because those who've gone out and defended our nation. Now, even in South Australia, and they're not even saying Anzac Day again. They want us to just call it April the 25th. April the 25th. And so we've got a party that's put aside the whole reason of Anzac Day, so you can have an alternate day, just kick it out the door and take another day. And then you've got South Australia where it's a bit like Australia Day.
Barnaby Joyce, look, the day is a public holiday, so people could go to Anzac Day and mark it. That's what it was off for. It wasn't off for, this is a holiday, just the umbrella. That's what it was for. If you don't want to use it for that, you don't want to use it for that day, you lose it. Use it or lose it. Barnaby Joyce, thank you so much indeed for your time. After the break, one of America's top generals tears into the Albanese government for not acting on the danger that even the government admits is facing us. His analysis will frighten you. Now, yesterday, as we discussed, the Albanese government named China as our big military threat. Said the security danger had actually worsened over the last year. And yet, it said, the Defence Minister said, we're not going to have the weapons we need for another decade. Now, the government is spending more on defence to catch up, it announced, but not much more at all, just $1.4 billion a year for the next 4 years, which for defence purposes is peanuts, really. And yet even that little bit is still too much for China, which gave the Albanese government a whack, saying it was siding too much with America.
This creates confrontations between blocs, especially stirring up trouble in the South China Sea, fearing peace and stability. China firmly opposes this. We hope that Australia will correctly understand China's development and strategic intentions.
But one of America's top generals says, well, China is now so dangerous, the whole world is suddenly facing so many major conflicts. I mean, have a look around, that our government has actually got to wake up. I spoke earlier to Jack Keane, who's a retired 4-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army and is now chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Keane, thank you so much for your time. Listen, I doubt that in your long and distinguished military career that you've often seen the world this close to a world war. We've got a major war in Europe, Ukraine, and on the weekend, Iran attacked Israel directly, firing more than 300 missiles and drones at it, but killing no one. Almost every one of the projectiles shot down. I thought at the time Iran pulled its punches, didn't want a full-out war, but it still must have been stunned by actually causing almost zero damage at all.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, Andrew. I mean, most of us thought that Iran would not push this too far, and frankly, they did. It's a game changer for Iran in terms of the scale and the comprehensiveness of the attack. I mean, 120 ballistic missiles, 30 cruise missiles, and 170 drones. They took a page out of what Russia does routinely now in Ukraine. It took Russia a while to figure this out, but this is how they're conducting their air campaign with the same pieces and parts that Iran is doing. It's absolutely stunning and humiliating for Iran that this attack failed so miserably, partly due to themselves, because so many of their ballistic missiles malfunction, but certainly due to the multi-layered defense of the IDF in Israel. And also, Andrew, the warfighting headquarters the United States have there is called Central Command, and they organized a multinational response, something they've been doing for years in that region and have a lot of expertise at. But the game changer here is not so much the United States, UK, and France participated for the first time ever helping to defend Israel, but then so did the Arabs, Andrew. And that is a major paradigm shift. Jordan was up in the air shooting at these incoming missiles. Saudi Arabia and the UAE and other nations had their radars all lit up, and they were helping provide early warning and direction to the major headquarters that CENTCOM has in the area. This is extraordinary to see the Arabs with Israel engaged with Iran.
And it's interesting that the Arab nations, Sunni Arab nations, see Shiite Iran as a far greater threat to them than Israel ever was. So that, I think, is amazing. One more sign, I guess, of the weakness of the US under Joe Biden. I mean, Russia invading Ukraine and now slowly pushing back the Ukrainian army. This attack, the last year's attack by Hamas on Israel, that was actually backed by Iran as well. The Houthi rebels you mentioned attacking ships in the Red Sea. China threatening to invade Taiwan. It seems that dangerous parts of the world are no longer that scared of the US. It'll say no, but they'll still do it.
Yeah, these global security challenges that you're just enumerating here are on a scale I don't believe we've seen since World War II. Look at the facts. We've got a major war in Europe by an aggressor, Russia, who wants to take Ukraine down and expand into Eastern Europe and take back some of the former Soviet Union territory. That's a fact. It's not disputable. We've got a major war in the Middle East, started by Iran, operationalized all of their proxies, obviously supported the Hamas invasion, and they clearly want to take control of the Middle East region. That's what they're about, and destroy the state of Israel. This is serious threat on their part. And as you mentioned, China has said to us publicly more than once that he told his military forces to be ready to seize and take control of Taiwan by 2027 if the Taiwanese don't voluntarily submit and become a part of mainland China. I think we should accept him at his word and recognize that we could be not at war just in Europe or in the Middle East, but war in one or two places at the same time, like we were in World War II. This is the reality we're facing, and it's a serious one. What we've got to be about here is deterring that war, stopping it, making certain the President Xi sees the capability and the will of the countries in the Indo-Pacific region, military capability and willingness to step up. He sees it, understands it, so do his generals, and the cost is going to be too great. They don't want to take the chance that they could lose. That's how we held back the Soviet Union during the Cold War, just based on that reality alone. But we're not there. When they look, I think they see vulnerability in terms of military capability in the region. The fact is, my president wants to compete with China, but he's losing a competition.
Yes, they're only seeing signs of weakness. America fleeing Afghanistan, the West wavering in its support for Ukraine, which is now on the back foot. But speaking of that wider picture now, our government has just announced a big change in our strategy for developing our military because it has seen these big changes. But the catch here, General, is that despite saying we won't have an army ready for war for another 10 years, despite the fact that it says we won't get much warning now, despite the fact it says the security situation has worsened considerably over the last 12 months, it's not going to spend that much more, $1.5 billion a year for the next 4 years more. And how, I mean, what are we going to do? I mean, how much time have we actually got to prepare for a war that our own defence minister says our army won't be prepared to fight for another decade?
Yeah. The government's got to wake up and see the facts for what they really are. Look what Japan has done. They've almost doubled their budget. And they see the reality and the writing on the wall, so to speak. And they're making, and you know, Japan has been, because of the World War II experience, has been a very passive country in terms of its military. So it's a major cultural shift. Two different governments, in terms of their political views, have come to the same conclusion in Japan. This is a serious threat, and we've got to step up. And here's something else that our audience here may not realize. Japan is concerned about Russia and China and Ukraine winning, and so much so that the number 3 nation in the world that provides aid to Ukraine after the United States, after the United Kingdom, is Japan. And they're not even in Europe, obviously. Why are they doing that? Because they see if Russia wins in Ukraine, so does China, and it incentivizes China to take the United States on our allies in the Pacific, much as Russia is doing in Europe. And Japan has awoken. They see the threat for what it is. South Korea, the same way. And I think the government in Australia has got to see it for what it is.
Yes, but we won't get the first of those nuclear submarines for a decade. I mean, we just got to hope that China is not going to do anything. I mean, that's what a strategy. General Jack Keane, always insightful to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew, as always. Thank you.
After the break, just in, dramatic footage of a carjacking in Darwin at knife point by a car owned by a nurse who feels, well, what she's got to say, Will, it's just heartbreaking, that youth crime crisis in the Northern Territory. Plus, my book and whiskey of the week. That, at least, is guaranteed to make your weekend. Footage of that attempted carjacking coming up. Youths as young as 11. Unbelievable. But first, what struck me very dramatically has been the difference in the media coverage of the Christian bishop who was stabbed on Monday and the Muslim teenager who allegedly did it. Of that 16-year-old, we're now told there were no signs that he was radicalised. We're told he played the drums and danced. The radical person would not do that. We're told he's sorry. We're told to cool it. There are fears that mosques might now be attacked, and all that's fine. But the coverage of the bishop is not. The victim, he's the victim, but we're told he was a lockdown skeptic, an anti-vaxxer. We're told by the Saturday paper's Paul Bongiorno, he's a hate preacher who begets hate, and terrorists are also in pulpits. And the Sydney Morning Herald reports, hate me, accept me or reject me, the inflammatory words of the bishop stabbed in Sydney. Except, and really, seriously, what the bishop said in that headline, that wasn't inflammatory at all. He actually said to Muslim critics of his teaching, I love you, and I will always love you, and I pray for you, and I will always continue to pray for you, whether you hate me, whether you like me, hate me, accept me or reject me. How's that inflammatory? Sounds pretty good. Okay, he did also previously say things that a Sydney Morning Herald writer might think were inflammatory. I mean, Muhammad failed, which actually you might expect from a Christian preacher. Woke Pope, well, that's actually true, I think. And a nasty crack at the transgender movement. Sure, okay, but I'm not sure that's relevant to this stabbing. But since the stabbing, the bishop has actually said he forgives and prays for his attacker. He has urged his followers to also follow the example of Christ and be peaceful.
A piece of advice to our beloved faithfuls. I need you to act Christ-like. The Lord Jesus never taught us to fight. The Lord Jesus never taught us to retaliate. The Lord Jesus never said to us, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Joining me is the panel, James McPherson and Liz Storrow, both of the Late Debate here on Sky News at 10 p.m. Great show. James, So this is the man the media left smeared as an extremist and a hate preacher?
Yeah, it's been quite enlightening, Andrew, the last 24 hours. We now know that according to the progressive left, if you are anti-mandatory vaccines, if you're anti-lockdowns, and if you believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, you're a dangerous extremist who should get whatever's coming your way. But on the other hand, if you're an Islamic extremist who stabs somebody because you disagreed with what they said about the Prophet Muhammad, well, you're probably a misunderstood saint who needs cuddles. So Christians have certainly learned where they stand in the pecking order in the last 24 hours.
Liz, there'd be other stuff people might point to, say, no, the picture's not as simplistic as I've just pointed out. But seriously, there was an undertone, not quite that the bishop deserved to be stabbed, but boy, he had some responsibility for it.
Yes, and there's no surprise coming from our media, Andrew, because we know it's always open season on Christians. We've seen this for years in our nation now. There's little more that they love than collecting Christian scalps. They got Margaret Courts, they got Israel Folau, they got Andrew Thorburns, they got Cardinal George Pels. They love doing this. They love discrediting Christianity and Christians because this faith is the natural enemy of every single agenda the left pushes. So even when they're talking about someone who has just survived an attack on his life and handled it impeccably, preaching peace to his followers who are rightly very upset and ready to riot the night of this attack. And also we've heard reports that immediately after the attempt on his life, the bishop prayed for this young man, placing his hands on his head. I'm sure Jesus himself, and I say this as a lifelong Christian, I don't think Jesus himself would have handled this attack much differently, and yet trust the lefty trash media in this country, Andrew, to still go, how can we make this guy look like an unhinged whack job?
Well, I'm afraid I did get that feeling, not from all the coverage by a long shot, but from some of it. Unbelievable. Here's some really distressing news, and I thank the Australian newspaper for the footage. We've been talking a lot about the youth crisis in Alice Springs, but as I keep saying, it's not just Alice Springs, and indeed, where, of course, you've seen Aboriginal children underparented, whatever. Here, a nurse, a group of kids as young as 11, tried to carjack a Darwin nurse using a knife, would you believe? Two 11-year-old, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old. Unbelievable. And the nurse says, well, she's in shock, of course. She says, I'm always helping them. I'm always helping the community. I'm working in a hospital. Lots of Indigenous people are there. I'm caring for them in the hospital. I'm betrayed. This is too much. Honestly, James, what is to be done? Policing is not enough. There is a major issue in how some communities have gone off the radar, dropped off the edge of the world.
Yeah, well, Andrew, I mean, it is shocking footage, but as someone who lived in Townsville for 10 years, it's not at all surprising. I mean, we had our car stolen twice by children. On one occasion, they broke into our home during the night while we were asleep. So North Queenslanders and people in the Territory, they're well used to this. It's a shock for all of us in major cities, but not a shock for them. I was talking to a detective on Palm Island just last weekend, and he told me that Indigenous elders have started walking the streets at 2 a.m. in Palm Island to gather children together and get them home to try to reduce youth crime. He also told me that on Palm Island, the local leaders and indeed the police, they all think Jacinta Price, every time she speaks, is spot on. It's an issue of dealing with parents. It's an issue of governments having to take crime seriously and not pander to this just because, well, they're children and they don't understand. There's a range of issues that need to be embraced. And, locals in North Queensland and even the police are saying Jacinta Price makes sense, but what Labor governments are doing around the place is either nothing or even worse than nothing. And the shocking vision you've just shown is a result of that ineptitude.
Yeah, well, Liz, there were a couple of things in this story in the Australian that struck me. One is that the two 11-year-olds were brought to a responsible adult, and it didn't say parent. So God knows what's happening there. and now someone else was sent to the Tiwi Islands, or one of them was sent to the Tiwi Islands, so they weren't where they should have been, one would think. What is going on? It seems to me a collapse in parental authority to start with.
Absolutely. Clearly, they're not with their parents. Otherwise, we would have been told that they would have been returned to those homes. Clearly, they perhaps don't want to be in the houses in which they are currently placed. There's always reasons for why kids resort to this kind of behaviour, and you can only imagine what that is. We know that this nurse was just stopped at a vacant lot collecting some flowers. Imagine looking up from picking a few flowers on a vacant lot to these kids armed with knives threatening you. Thank God the nurse escaped with both her life and her car. Police also say that those same kids then approached a guy who was refueling a car that evening and smacked him in the head with a hammer. They were unsuccessful in stealing his car as well, which kind of makes a bit of sense when you know that two of them were 11, Andrew. These are well and truly children.
It's Lord of the Flies territory. Honestly, James McPherson and Liz Storrow, thank you both for your time. Really appreciate it. Okay, well, let's end up on a high. Well, it's a bit elegiac, actually. My book tip of the week, one that I've thought about often this week because, you know, it's in my mind. How do we keep this country together when what unites us seems so weak and strong ethnic and racial and religious loyalties are tearing us apart? Look what we've just been talking about. It's this book. It's one of my favourite novels. It's a hardback, but there's a better paperback. I got this because I loved it so much. The Radetzky March by a great journalist I've mentioned before, a Jew from the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, Joseph Roth, who had to flee to France when Hitler took over Germany. This book was also made into a great TV series, an elegy to that Austro-Hungarian Empire, how it had so many minorities, Germans, Jews, Ukrainians, Poles, Czechs, Hungarians, Slovenians, whatever, so many. And it's about the legend, Hungarians particularly, of course, it's about the legends it invented to get people to love it, love their emperor and all that, and how it all fell apart. Ripped apart with a new nationalism. Now we've got identity politics. If all fell apart in World War I, like the Russian Empire did too, and Joseph Roth wasn't sure anymore that it was better. And all this was before World War II, mind you. Read it. It's romantic, it's tragic, featuring at times this sort of family history, but also telling you about the most important family in European history, the Habsburgs, who once ruled over so much of the world, much of it pulled together the marriage alliances, which pretty incredible feat when you consider the inbreeding that gave the Habsburgs the infamous Habsburg jaw or Habsburg's lip. But look at the beauty they left behind, like the Schönbrunn Palace outside Vienna that many Australian tourists would have visited. As always, you can find this book on the Robertson Bookshop website, the link to my tips on the left side of the screen and to my past tips as well. And my whiskey of the week, one that I promoted very hurriedly, didn't do it the service it deserved, is another reminder of how kingdoms can fall. It's Highland Park. This one's at 18 year, brilliant. From the Orkney Islands, which for 600 years was actually Norwegian. And that's only until 600 years ago. Tang of the sea, beautiful. That's it from me. Sherry Markson up next. Good night.